Committee counsel will question the witness.
Mr. Dean, you stated, did you not, that well before the so-called Liddy plan, spelled out in meetings on January 27 and February 4, 1972, that there was an atmosphere in the White House conducive to the bugging and break-in of the Democratic National Committee headquarters. Is that true?
That is correct.
Let me very briefly summarize the key plans and activities which you state in your statement created such an atmosphere. The first, I understand, was an overall intelligence plan developed by the time you had already arrived at the White House in July of 1970 by White House leadership, or including White House leadership, to deal with internal security and domestic dissent, which included such activities as illegal break-in and wiretapping. And these are the papers which I understand you submitted to Judge Sirica and which this committee has received from Judge Sirica.
That is correct, and I believe that was indicative of a concern that existed regarding that particular area of problem.
Then there was the so-called plumbers operation set up in the White House in 1971 under Mr. Ehrlichman and Mr. Krogh, utilizing Mr. Hunt and Mr. Liddy to investigate leaks such as the Pentagon paper leaks, which utilized such tactics as break-ins, photographing, and bugging. And then there was Operation Sandwich, recommended by Mr. Caulfield but never finally approved, which had covert features to it, such as the use of bagmen and wiretapping. Now, generally, is that the context in which you describe the atmosphere that was conducive to such activities as break-ins and wiretapping in the White House?
I think, Mr. Dash, you have capsulized some of the high points of the concerns I expressed yesterday.
Well, I'm attempting just to capsulize and not go over your lengthy statement. Therefore, in addition to your testimony about the President and the White House staff members' obsession over demonstrators and leaks, is this then a brief and fair summary, in a nutshell, of the kind of practices the President, to some extent, and White House officials such as Holden and Ehrlichman had approved or considered to crush internal dissent or obtain political intelligence?
I think that this is indicative, Mr. Dash, of the fact that the White House often took it upon itself to obtain information or resolve a problem when it felt that an agency of the government was incapable or unsatisfactory in dealing with the problem, that the White House itself felt that they were quite capable of handling the problem and thereupon would handle the problem.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to 44 Minutes.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Kevin.
That's the first time we've introduced ourselves in an episode in a while.
Yeah, I know, right?
We just haven't needed to do it at this point. If you've watched this many, then you know who the fuck we are. And if you don't, I mean...
Well, it's like Kevin Smith said. You never know if somebody's watching it's their first one. That's not what he said at all, but that was the intention.
Was this on Smodcast?
It's something he usually does in his Q&As. And I think he actually got it from Stan Lee.
Oh, I see.
We're getting very official and very particular because our episode this week is a piece of American history, Watergate.
Yeah. I should explain why I picked this one up. For the most part, I know it's just like, let's pick things that are fun or, like something like contentious like the John Wayne record, which I bought this the same day I bought the John Wayne record. So depending on what record store you go to, the other section is always fun. Like a lot of these are the kinds of things you'd find in like the other miscellaneous or comedy sections.
What we have here
is something I actually found in the political section. I didn't realize I was there. I was just digging through records. And at Amoeba Records in Hollywood, they have just a political records section, which is why I actually have several political records now, which I guess it means we're occasionally going to have like serious research-driven episodes.
And what we found in our research is that we need to have actual people who've studied this. We've already talked about for this. This is actually, it's the Watergate series by Folkways Records.
Yeah.
This is volume
yeah.
3. Okay, let's hold that back up again. Volume 3, I Hope the President is Forgiven, which is the deposition and testimony of John W. Dean III, who we will get much more in depth in this very soon, but he is a key piece of the indication of President Nixon's involvement in the Watergate scandal. And what I mean by we need somebody who's an expert, and we'll be coming back to this, is because it's a 5-record series, yeah. And so this is right in the middle. It was just the only one we had, the only one that Dan had found, and we found that it would be really interesting to go back and see the different pieces and how they all fit into this. One of the key interesting pieces about this record in particular is that it was released in 1974, I believe, and this is right in the middle of the 1974.
Because is it the deposition or what?
It is the testimony by the congressional committee that is looking to begin the investigation into the president.
Or into the incident that occurred at the DNC headquarters.
Well, the key thing is that I keep saying key. The important thing here is that the original members of the Watergate burglarizing team came from the re-election committee for the president. They had already been tried and charged, but this was the follow-up to that, where the FBI and the CIA were getting involved in following the money trail, where these guys were getting their funding, and finding that it was actually directly linked to the aides of the president and the counsel. John W. Dean was the presidential counsel to Nixon, and his involvement, as the FBI referred to him, he was the master manipulator of the cover-up. And that's how this all ties together, is that he was looking to open up the ties, and he had received some immunity for this testimony, but later served a sentence for his involvement in the cover-up of the scandal. This is a lot of information because there's so much to this. We need to keep talking about it.
Here's the thing. When I go back and when I edit this episode, and probably when both of us start just looking for facts and stuff like that, and really getting into it and selecting what parts of this we're going to play for the episode, this is dense. I mean, it's a real thing.
It's a recording of the testimony.
Yeah,
this happened in
it's a
court.
selected, compiled testimony of it, but it's all real. It's very dense. It requires, to a point, at least some foreknowledge of a lot of this. I mean, like, what's your foreknowledge of what Watergate was before this?
And I think my foreknowledge is probably like most people. There was a break-in at the Watergate Hotel where the Democratic National Committee was meeting. Somehow that tied into the president. The president was in the process of being impeached, and he resigned before anything formal occurred.
And then was pardoned by Ford.
And yes, he was pardoned by Ford, I think, within the year after. Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward when you look at just those general concepts. But when you start getting into the details of who was involved and how this group of, basically a non-profit group, a bureaucratic group separated from the governmental entity, somehow is then pulled into the presidential cabinet, and all these individuals involved, former attorney generals and presidential aides.
Wasn't John Dean? He was the counsel for
yes,
yeah, he was counsel for the White House.
He was the key individual for basically tying the re-election committee to the presidential committee.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to have, and we'll tell you right now, you're listening to this, if you're listening to this as the podcast, you're probably going to have to go and watch the episode because we're going to be filling it with notes at the bottom of the screen.
So many notes, or at least I'll go at the end and just record me saying like, hey, this is like literally just like the vomit of information that we're going to have to supply.
It's going to be a lot of in notes in the episode and footnotes at the end.
National security matters. We saw there were legal problems, although we had resolved in our own mind that these were not problems as far as preventing necessary disclosures of the contents of some of these conversations. However, however, I must be very candid that I was hopeful that the President himself would step forward and tell of his involvement in some of these things.
Now, Mr. Dean, you opened up your statement when you first began to testify before this committee yesterday by purporting to soften the blow concerning the President by stating that you do not believe the President realized the full implications of his involvement. Now, if you have told the truth before this committee about what the President said to you on September 15th, what you said to him, and as to the subsequent meetings you had with the President, can you honestly believe that the President, as a lawyer and a sophisticated man in politics, was not aware of the full implications of the cover-up activities?
Mr. Dash, I think my opening remarks were more directed at the human side of the situation than the legal side of the situation. That he didn't realize the implications as far as what this would mean for people he'd worked with for a number of years, people he was very fond of, and I wasn't necessarily referring to the full legal implications of some of his activities.
Well, do you have a belief as to whether or not he did have knowledge of the implications, the legal implications of this cover-up activity?
I can't put myself in the President's mind.
Based on the facts you've given this committee?
Based on the facts I've given this committee, I would think the President would certainly have some appreciation of the legal problems involved, yes, indeed.
Mr. Dean, you've made serious charges before the committee. Do you have any special motive in making these charges, such as a hope for immunity before the prosecutors? You've already have received immunity before this committee, which is only use immunity, and does not prevent your being prosecuted for any crimes that the prosecutors have evidence against you. Do you have any motive in making these charges against the President based on the fact that this may lead to giving you immunity from the prosecutors?
Mr. Dash, I've been asked to give testimony. That testimony happens to involve the President of the United States. I have no motive in giving that testimony to try to obtain immunity from the prosecutors. No, sir.
Now, I guess you're fully aware, Mr. Dean, of the gravity of the charges you have made under oath against the highest official of our land, the President of the United States.
Yes, I am.
And being so aware, do you still stand on your statement?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
I'd say before we really get into a lot of the details, and maybe this is a good way to do it, what did you, because my understanding of it was similar. I knew that it was members of the Reagan White House staff.
Nixon.
Or Reagan.
Yeah, this,
you know what you did earlier.
Exactly.
Fuck.
I had said earlier, I was like, I cannot shake saying Reagan when I'm thinking about
it's
this.
Nixon.
And I have not done it since, and now he's on it.
It's
just to make this more confusing.
Fault. No. Okay, so the Nixon, it was members of the Haldeman and Ehrlichman, I think, were actually, they were the people who broke in, right? Or they were...
No, they were related to him. I believe Martinez was one of the people. We didn't take enough notes.
Yeah, no, the problem is that we gave ourselves like a week to prepare. No, we didn't give ourselves a week.
We did a week to prepare for the other episode, Monty Python, which we literally just recorded before this. So we have gone a full 180 out from the comedy of that.
Whereas we've had like, I think I sent this to you yesterday. And
yes.
You're just picking it apart now. And you know what? I think even if we had the week to do research, like this is the kind of thing that people write a fucking dissertation about. Like,
this is
for poli-sci majors.
Yeah, like, this is political science at its best, and we've actually talked about that. We know some people who would be able to get involved with the show. And
maybe all day.
Well, we say they'd probably be able to, but the question is, will they?
Will they? The guy I know lives in like Olympia, Washington, but I'd almost be willing to like make the call up there just to ask him to like provide some commentary, maybe that we can cut in or something like. We'll see what happens.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah,
because we will be finding the other records in this series.
And when we do, we want to have separate episodes on that.
Speaking of which, really quick before we run out of time for this half, the Folkways Records Company is actually now owned by the Smithsonian and is known as Smithsonian Folkways.
You can buy these online.
They're available online. I believe they're listed as being DRM free, so theoretically they're meant for mass consumption. But the The element of this that's really interesting is that Folkways was picked up by the Smithsonian because they focused on records and musicians and things that were a part of American culture. And the Smithsonian... Bob Seger?
Yeah.
Or Pete Seeger.
Why did I say Bob Seger? Oh.
You're on a roll now. Pete Seeger, what was it, Crowell? Was that one Bob Crowell?
Maybe. Leadbelly.
Leadbelly. All groups and people that are important to American history and American culture. So the Smithsonian has acquired it for their folk division.
And, American musical history and
exactly.
stuff like that.
I say folk as in it's about Americana.
Yeah. And by the way, we just figured out that I have another political record that Folkways also released, which is this one right here, The Untypical Politician.
And we have absolutely no idea what's in there.
Yeah, no clue on that one. Something I did read about Folkways that was interesting is what came with this here is this really wonderful, I'm going to pull it out, this. So apparently this is a thing that Folkways did.
Bless you.
We'll actually edit that one out this time.
Go.
This is a thing that Folkways did where they included these kind of lengthy, really nice inserts. I read this is something they did with all their records.
And this one, like you said, with all their records, this gives a really good background to what this record is.
Without this, this would just be kind of a fascinating, dense thing to listen to. Because it is interesting. But
this sets it up. This talks about how John Dean was basically on this testimony after giving a 245-page deposition that he recounted before these questions in this record, which took 6 hours. He spoke for 6 hours, and then he went into being questioned. And it's impressive, the amount of work that went into this and the depth of this testimony. And there are parts of this, too, where you'll hear they get into nitpicking details about parts of that testimony that he gave
and some potential embezzlement that he was involved in, which I'm sort of wondering is what was the deal with that being a part of it? Is that really the most important thing that they needed to pick apart?
Well, I think one of the things we were reading about this is that this helped put a bad name for lawyers because virtually everybody involved was a lawyer or involved in the legal profession. And you'll see in cases like that where there begins to be arguments about word choice or whether a crime that they committed was actually a crime or their knowledge of what was going on. And it becomes then this entire battle of legalese. And it's just, again, that's why it's so dense, is that you're looking at lawyers testifying as lawyers against lawyers while being listened to by lawyers.
Yeah.
It's hard, but you can see why you get so little detail about the Watergate besides that it was a scandal and that it involved the president and that he resigned.
All right.
Hold on. Just want to say that. Go for it.
I think it's a good breaking point just because we can get exactly into why this testimony is particularly important to the Watergate scandal itself.
Okay. And interestingly enough, another thing is why the youth were involved in this.
Yes.
And you'll hear that in the record.
Yeah, there's people clapping and cheering and shit.
Which is weird because it's official, an official national, event and in a court and people are cheering like they're watching a show. So we will be right back. We might even do some research just to clarify anything. Just for right now, details. Just a second.
Let's turn now to the September 15th meeting with the President and Mr. Holloman and yourself. That, of course, is a very important meeting because I understand from your testimony that it was at that meeting that you felt that the President knew all about Watergate. Is that right?
Well, I'll say this. When I came in, the indictments had been announced. He was a very cordial circumstance. The President asked me to sit down and told me that Bob had told me what I'd been doing, and he expressed appreciation for it. He, indicated that he was. I could tell. You can tell when you're talking to the president, and he understands or not. I mean, I learned that even more later when I had more dealings with him, when I knew that something would come up that he knew nothing about, and I would have to go into greater detail.
Did you discuss the criminal cases that were coming on for trial?
Yes, we did. Or it was the criminal case at that point. There was the entire 7 were being moved forward as a trial.
Did you discuss the civil suits that were filed by the Democrats?
Yes, we did.
Did you discuss the Common Cause suit that had been filed by Common Cause?
That is correct.
Did you discuss the Patman hearings that were imminent?
That is correct, we did.
Any idea how long these discussions took?
I would say that the entire meeting lasted 30 minutes or so, 40 minutes.
Did you discuss any aspects of the Watergate at that meeting with the president? For example, did you tell him anything about what Haldeman knew or what Ehrlichman knew?
Well, given the fact that he told me I'd done a good job, I assumed that he was very pleased with what had been going on. The fact that the indictments had been, he was pleased that the indictments had stopped at Liddy, because the only other link into the White House, as we had discussed earlier in sessions with Ehrlichman and Haldeman, was Magruder.
Welcome back, everybody. So we did a little bit of research real quick. One of the things we wanted to mention is that the original burglars from the, as it's officially called, Committee for the Re-Election of the President, the burglars who actually entered the Watergate Hotel were Virgilio Gonzalez, Bernard Barker, James McCord, Eugenio Martinez, and Frank Sturgis. And they were led by somebody by the name of Liddy. The original name...
G. Gordon Liddy.
G. Gordon Liddy. The original name of the plan, it sounds like, based on the testimony, was the Liddy Plan. But the important thing here is there are a lot of names involved, a lot of different
60
positions.
some odd.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were 69 people indicted for the entire involvement from the burglary through the cover-up to the very end. Of those 69 people, 48 were charged and actually served sentences. Those were people including the burglars through the staff of the committee to presidential aides and former attorney generals. Just so many different people involved. And that's because it became a huge deal. It wasn't about the particular people. It was about the idea that something as, I don't want to necessarily say inane as wiretapping and burglarizing and using bagmen, as they said.
But basically, they were using the kind of espionage techniques you'd use on like if you were investigating a crime, if you were trying to spy on the enemy. I don't know, Cold War, But it's just like they're enacting that against other Americans and their political rivals in order to get kind of like a leg up and get like real dirt on them and to, really, and to try to win the election.
And
which
that's
they
what
did.
it comes down to.
Nixon
Yeah.
did win. I don't think he necessarily won because of backhanded politics. I think he won because he won.
Which is kind of the ironic thing of the whole thing.
Shitty, but...
That's the irony of the whole thing, is that this probably was entirely unnecessary, but Nixon as an individual was so dead set on being the winner that he was willing to do something unscrupulous like this.
Yeah.
And that's where this whole testimony comes into place. This is where the president's involvement becomes known to the public. That John Dean said that he could tell the president knew what was going on. That starts the investigation into the presidential tapes, where a grand jury has to subpoena him and get a hold of these tapes, finding that they've been modified in other information that was destroyed, and just all these arrows suddenly pointing in so many more directions than were originally realized when they started this investigation.
And what's sort of important there is that his entire purpose in doing this it wasn't necessarily, it was, I mean, maybe to kind of protect himself as this whole shit show is getting started. But the idea being that he didn't want this to get back to the president. He didn't want the president to be involved. Him doing this, and him and Ehrlichman and
Haldeman.
And
Haldeman, yeah.
And I can't remember who else. Him and basically all those people who were kind of closest to the president. The idea is that they would divert attention away from the president, place blame on these people, be like the president didn't know, the president wasn't involved, he wasn't involved in the cover-up. And
which does lead to the odd part where he does talk about and outright says in the testimony that the president seemed to know about this because of the way he was speaking. He never actually, and that was something that was questioned in the testimony. The two people who question Dean in the record, one is I didn't get to find out more information about him. That's Samuel Dash. But the other one is Senator Edward J. Gurney of Florida, who in that little what's that thing called that they put in there?
The insert,
insert,
the liner notes. Yeah.
The liner notes that they provide have a note in there that says that Dean acknowledged that Gurney was going to be loyal to the president no matter what, and without being asked. And you can see that in the recording of the testimony that he starts attacking Dean on different accounts and different points. Some of them are just completely unrelated to what's going on. Like, what's the definition of embezzlement? And what did you do with this money that you took out of this account? And why can't you account for it even though it's been a year and you had these plans for it and you didn't put it back when it was done and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And it just goes on and on and on.
Like, literally, like, dragging at every end and seam like they're supposed to, really. But just, like... But, like, there's this whole belabored section on what hotel... He met, who was
Kalmbach.
it? Yeah, Kalmbach. What hotel he met Kalmbach in, whether or not it was it the Hilton?
The Stafford Hilton.
It was either the Stafford Hilton or the Mayflower.
And in one of the funny moments, and yes, there are funny moments in this record, they end that section of, okay, fine, just because you didn't remember it, it doesn't matter, all we know is that you met with him, da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
They break to another section where they're talking about, I think it was something else to do with money or some other meeting, and Dean pauses that part of the questioning to say, I was just informed that the name of the cafe at the Stafford Hilton is the Mayflower, and the room just erupts in laughter and applause.
Yeah.
And it's...
And like one of the... I don't know who it was, because he's not speaking in the rest of it, southern accent. Maybe we should just look into that. Just starts like banging with the gavel and just be like...
and
we like to refrain from cheering. And
it's an order in the court moment for the whole process.
For this like really serious...
Ran into this other record at the Statler Hilton Hotel. It just doesn't make sense. If he was coming into the city under an assumed name so that no one would know he was here and no later record could be found, why in the world would he register under his own name at a nearby hotel, the Washington Hilton, and then engage another room over in the Mayflower to meet with you? It just doesn't add up.
I see what you're saying. I have testified the Mayflower, and I am never sure which is the Mayflower, which is the Statler Hilton. Is the hotel I recall is the one that's on 16th Street, up from the White House. I know I walked up from the office to his room.
Well, you say, how long have you lived in Washington?
I've been here about 10 years.
And you don't know the difference between the Washington Hilton and the Mayflower Hotel?
I continually get them confused, I must confess.
Well, I must say, I am reminded of your colloquy with the chairman yesterday, Mr. Dean, when you said what an excellent memory you had right from school days right on down, and that's why you were able to reconstruct
I feel my memory is good, but I confuse some names often. I don't tend to have a perfect memory. I think I have a good memory, Senator.
Do you have an air travel credit card?
No, I do not.
You would pay for your air travel off either American Express or Bank America.
That is correct. Or by cash or check.
Let me ask the chief counsel of the committee, have we subpoenaed the financial records?
We subpoenaed all the records of Mr. Dean, and we also have one of our chief investigators, Mr. Carmen Bellino, who will be going over those records with Mr. Dean.
I might just go back to one point. The name of the coffee shop at the Statler Hilton is the Mayflower.
Well...
The audience will please refrain from applause or demonstrating their reaction to any testimony.
Is that what your attorney just told you?
Yes, he did.
His memory apparently is much better than yours. Well, let me ask you, Mr. Dean, what does that mean? Now, what is your testimony so that we can get it on the record here?
What I would like to say is that I have a very clear recollection of meeting with Mr. Kalmbach in the coffee shop before our meeting in his room. I think Mr. Kalmbach can resolve, if it's important to the senator, the particular location of that meeting. To me, that was the substance of the meeting that was the important thing,
Well,
and I
what-
think I've relayed to the committee in full the substance of the meeting and what occurred as a result of the meeting.
Now, what is your testimony as to what hotel?
To the best of my recollection, it was the Mayflower, but if I'm incorrect, I'll stand corrected.
It's the implication here when you really think about it. A bunch of guys breaking into the the DNC headquarters and wiretapping it, horrifying, but like nowhere near like the greatest political scandal of the last 100 years in any way, shape, or form. I think it's really just that everyone got caught and the amount of fucking people involved.
And the fact that there was the cover-up. I mean, if there had just been this... And I wonder how,
it was a chance to take down who for a lot of people was a super unpopular president. So we're coming hot off the heels of the Vietnam War. As much as, and this is from what I've heard, I could be wrong about this, Nixon was technically involved in the end of the Vietnam War, but I think it was just at that point, it was the war had fallen completely out of favor and everyone was sort of, fatigued, and it was just the right political move for him to do. But we're still talking about, a president who was vastly unpopular, who was, really strong conservative. Admittedly, the first guy to open relations with China, but he was a seriously unpopular president. You're coming off of that sort of hippie counterculture generation. When people found an opening to take down a president, a real opening to take down a president, they fucking beeline for it. And admittedly, this is way worse than by the way, Clinton, Well,
one of the interesting things that like you were saying, it's really not that bad. There has basically been a group of people who've wanted to impeach and remove every president since then. And for things that are much worse. Like you just said, Clinton, and we have the whole case against
Clinton did worse things than get a blowjob from Monica Lewinsky.
He blew up an aspirin factory in Africa because they thought it was making drugs. I mean, it's like, when you look at the historical context, what happened here is pretty much pointless. It really has nothing to do with politics.
It's an internal political thing. All it represents is internal political corruption and the widespread... Again, I think it's really what it was is how big it was and how many people are implicated, not just the president.
How pervasive through the governing body of America it was.
But through all of this, they could get to the president.
And that's why there's a raucous group in this testimony.
Of
because
young people and a lot of people who were fucking... the fact that their records released, this is a year after this went down.
1974, and the testimony was 1973. This is before... This isn't like it's meant to record...
Haldeman Haldeman and Ehrlichman hadn't been... They hadn't gone to jail yet. That didn't happen until 76?
76, I believe, yes.
Yeah.
And there is also the fifth volume of this are their testimonies, Ehrlichman and Haldeman, which is the one we're going to see if we can find next. Because this is that important to sit down and listen to. And yes, it is dense and it is difficult to get through because it is a bunch of lawyers talking to each other.
Yeah. You have to be willing to sit down and listen to to testimony.
It's worth doing the research. And the fact that there were a bunch of youth there, and it says on that little insert that, you know, they were in their jeans and polo shirts. People were just coming in and they packed the room.
Poli-sci students from Georgetown probably just walking.
Oh yeah, seriously. They just like walked right in. But just the fact that this was so important, like you said, an internal event, an internal scandal to the United States government was so important to the youth of America at that time that they packed the room to the rafters.
It's... I don't want to entirely diminish it. We're not saying it's just like, oh, but it's just like, no, I'm fairly certain Nixon... It's not even... Watergate isn't about Watergate. Watergate is about, like, oh my God, the president is kind of a crook. I'm not a crook.
How did I know we were going there?
But no, I didn't mean to go... But it's just the idea being, it's just like, here's... You can know certain details and not be able to do anything about it, but it's just... It being such an internal, such a petty criminal offense. Espionage. But guys breaking in to something in the middle of the night and getting caught, you know.
And especially that it's just the Democratic National Committee.
But that's all it took to fucking unravel all of it. But the thing is, ultimately, Nixon got away with it.
Yeah, I mean, well, he resigned ahead of time and...
He resigned and Ford just kind of sat there and didn't do anything for a few years and then pardoned Nixon.
I wonder how that makes the people who were involved feel. If they felt like it was a real victory and then within a couple of years were like, what did we do?
Well, I think it's the whole thing when you really look at it. It's just like all these people like risked so much shit for the sake of re-election of Nixon, and it's kind of like, you know, and he walks away tarnished, but basically unscathed.
Yeah.
Like even his kind of like televised apology, the Frost Nixon things, that was totally planned on Nixon's part.
Oh, of course.
Like, you know,
you don't get to be president without being a very intellectual and understanding.
Nixon's probably one of the smartest presidents we've ever had. He's also a huge asshole. But I mean, I say that about a lot of people, but it's just like Nixon. Whoa.
Final thoughts.
But he kept it behind closed doors.
Yes.
I think this was really incredible, and I want the rest of these records. And I want to discuss it with someone who has a more dense, studied background on this and can actually speak to it further than we can.
Exactly. And since there are 5 records in total, this is our introduction. It's funny that it's right in the middle, but it's actually a very clutch album to the whole deposition and indictment and everything. So now we can go back and explore these other records. And, I mean, we could probably have a guest, the same guest or different guests for each one.
Yeah.
And I think it would be worth spending that time. And so we will be revisiting this with more knowledge and more interesting facts. Again, this is probably going to be packed full of information down here. We'll try not to get too dense with names and things, because with 69 people involved and plenty of witnesses and everything, I mean, we didn't even touch on Deep Throat.
Yeah.
And it's just, it goes on, and we will do our best to not make this unbearable, but I think it's worth it for people to hear what's going on. And this is, if it's important enough to be immortalized by the Smithsonian, it's worth taking the time to listen to 2 guys in a garage talk about it.
Yeah. It's set. It's a set. Built a set. Built a set. Bye. We'll see you later next time.
See you on the flip side.
In our set.
I am not a crook.
He isn't.
Okay.
The president stated it was blackmail, that it was wrong, that it would not work, and that the truth would come out anyway. Mr. Dean had said that a Cuban group could possibly be used to transfer the payments. Now, is that, to your recollection, a correct statement of how that conversation took place, or is your statement the correct?
No, sir. My recollection is there was no discussion of the... It appears to me what they've done is taken what I did raise on the 21st regarding Mr. Hunt's direct threat of a blackmail nature to John Ehrlichman and confused it with an earlier meeting which occurred on March 13th when the $1 million conversation came up and put the two together some way.
Now, Do you recall the president ever telling you that it was wrong to pay this $1 million?
To the contrary, he said it would be no problem to raise $1 million. I'm quite aware of the fact that in some circumstances, it's going to be my word against one man's word. It's going to be my word against two men. It's going to be my word against three men. And probably in some cases, it's going to be my word against four men. But I'm prepared to stand on my word and the truth and the knowledge and the facts I have. And I know the truth is my ally in this, and I think ultimately the truth is going to come out.
And that's the end of the episode.
Thank you very much for sticking around and watching the whole thing.
Like, subscribe, comment, click down below the thingy.
Exactly. And then click the other thing for the other thingy.
And then watch our other videos, and then watch the next video, and watch the last video. So watch our things.
We promise they're very similar, but very enjoyable.
Have a good one. Bye.